We must reform our mental health laws to better identify mentally disturbed individuals who may commit acts of violence and make sure those people not only get treatment, but when necessary, involuntary confinement. Mental illness and hatred pulls the trigger, not the gun. May God bless the victims and their families. May God bless America. Thank you very much. Thank you.
The President of the United States with some typically, characteristically ill-judged words there, blaming mental health rather than guns for the problem of the gun epidemic in the States. I'm joined on the line now by Hal Lambert, who's the founder of the Make America Great Again Exchange-Traded Fund. Hal, a very good afternoon to you.
Good afternoon.
Thanks so much for joining us this afternoon. I think everybody here in the United Kingdom shares the grief that you feel in the United States over these terrible shootings, yet more shootings. But I was intrigued by what the President said there, talking about mental health being the cause of this. The United States doesn't have a bigger problem with mental health than any other developed country, does it?
Well, mental health is just one aspect of it. I think there's many other aspects. I think one of which is a breakdown of the family. I think that's a major problem. If you look at the El Paso shooter, his father, I think, said he was a drug addict for 40 years. His father was, and when you have a family that's completely broken down, and most of these shooters, that tends to be a common thread where they have a very dysfunctional, broken home, and then they go out and act. And I think in addition to that, they have mental illness, because obviously there's a lot of people with broken families that don't do what they've done.
Scotland recently published absolutely terrible drug statistics, amongst the worst drug statistics in the Western world. We don't have a problem with gun crime, and there's a very simple reason for that. We don't allow people to buy guns, and when we had a mass shooting, a terrible mass shooting at Dunblane, we reformed the law and we took guns away from people. You are unique in the United States. You've got more guns in the United States than you have people.
Right. Well, we have the Second Amendment, and other countries do not have the constitutional protections that we have. And, you know, it's horrific what's happened, but that doesn't mean that that should take away my rights or anybody else that's law-abiding from being able to own a firearm or purchase a firearm. And that's what we're talking about here. And it happens every time there's one of these horrific crimes. You know, the politics come out and everybody jumps on and says we need gun control. You know what? We have laws against heroin. We have laws against cocaine. There's heroin and cocaine everywhere. You can make gun laws all you want. The law-abiding citizens will follow those. The people that are not law-abiding will not. And that's what we're talking about here, are people that are not law-abiding that will do this. And, you know, in all these cases, they're breaking the law with what they're doing. We have laws on the books with the things that they're doing, and they're breaking those laws. Law-abiding citizens don't. And so this is really a culture problem. But, you know, if we're going to talk about statistics, and you're talking about around the world, look, there are more people killed in the United States with knives than there are with rifles, which is what we're talking about here. An AR-15 is a rifle. If you look at the data, the last data we have is 2016 from the FBI, Department of Justice. 374 murders in the United States in 2016 were done by rifles. 1,604 murders by knives.
Yes,
and but
you can't do a mass shooting with knives, and you can't kill lots of people at the same time using a knife. And you can, of course, if you've got an assault rifle. Now, I mean, I know about the Second Amendment of the American Constitution, and there's a debate, isn't there, about what exactly it meant. But whatever side one falls on that debate, because some people say, well, actually, it was to set up militias in order to defend citizens. Whatever side on that debate you fall, the framers of the Constitution or the Second Amendment could never, in their wildest dreams, have imagined the kind of assault rifles and weapons that we now have, tragically, which are used so often in these killings. So, is there not a strong case now, an overwhelming case for evidence-based legislation? I'm looking at the statistics here of homicides by firearm per 1 million people. Australia, it's 1.4. New Zealand, which suffered its own tragedy recently and reformed the law as a result, 1.6. Germany, 1.9. Austria, 2.2. And then you go up to the United States. We're talking about Western democracies here. The United States is 29.7. At some stage, you've got to stand back, stop talking about 18th century constitutional amendments, and work out why it is that America is unique in these homicides and what you can do to change the law to save people's lives.
Well, look, I hear what you're saying, but the statistics also show, look, the AR-15, which is the weapon we're talking about here, and in many cases talk about, it's been around since the 1950s. Okay, so these mass shootings weren't occurring earlier in time. They're occurring now. And we have to ask ourselves, why is that happening? Why is it happening now and it didn't happen 30 years ago? Well, there's a big cultural breakdown. That's what I'm talking about here. It's not the guns, it's the people. And the people, we don't have a society in which people are raised properly. They're not raised in homes where this shouldn't, this should be taught. They shouldn't be doing these things. It's obviously evil. It's a real problem. But again, at the end of the day, does that mean that law-abiding citizens should lose their rights because of that?
Yes.
That's what we're talking
yes.
about. Well,
ultimately, yes. If I was a legislator in the United States and I realized that I had a unique epidemic, I think I would want to act on it. I'll tell you what I'd want to do. Stop praying. Because your politicians are constantly praying. Every time I switch on Twitter, you've got a host of senior Republicans who are offering prayers. The prayers aren't working.
Well, you know what?
And you need to start legislating.
Maybe that's why there's a problem, is because God's been taken out of everything here. Okay, and if you don't feel that
you're obsessed by God in the States.
Wait, if you don't feel that somebody's life is worth anything, then that's a problem, isn't it? And where does that come from?
Well, America is the most overtly religious country in the world. I don't think you've ever had a candidate running for senior office. Certainly, you've never had a president elected who said that he or she, there's never been a she, but he was an atheist. You elevate religion to a place in public life in America that no other Western democracy have. I mean, I'm not being disrespectful of people who are religious, but, praying is all very well. You've got to, if you want to save people's lives, you've got to take the gun out of American culture, because a lot of the things you're mentioning, you're talking about mental health, you're talking about the breakdown of the family, you're talking about drugs. None of these are unique to the United States. These are all problems that are shared by every European society as well. The only thing that we do not share is your mass murder rates.
Well, but wait a minute. Again, you're talking about horrific crimes, obviously, that get a lot of attention. But there were 11,000, this is the last year we had the data for 2016, there were 11,000 homicides by firearms in the United States that year. About 80%, 75% are handguns, okay? And most of those are done by gangs, gang-related violence. So what we're talking about here, as horrific as it is actually a very rare occurrence from a total numbers standpoint. But it is horrific, and again, I think it's a problem that needs to be addressed, but it can't be addressed by taking away other people's rights. That's not the way things should operate. These are not law-abiding citizens. There's about, they don't know the number, but it's between 5 and 10 million of these guns, these types of guns that were used in the United States right now. So as you can tell from that number, a tiny, tiny fraction are used in this manner. And what you're saying and what would have to happen would be that everybody would have to turn in those guns. People would have to turn in their guns.
Well, that's what happened after the Dunblane shooting. People had to hand in their guns, and we haven't had another mass shooting since then. So it worked. And I know a lot of people were unhappy about it, but ultimately, if you're a member of society, you've got to care about the greater good. So, maybe you like owning a handgun that you're, with a bit of luck, never going to use. But if for the greater good of society, you have to surrender it in order to get a handle on this terrible epidemic that you have, I think it'd be worth doing. But even if you didn't do that, surely, even if you can't get rid of the guns that are already out there in American society, you could start by making guns harder to get with background checks, not being able to transport guns across state lines, and removing the funds from American politics, because you've got the National Rifle Association, which is pumping its money into election campaigns, rendering your politicians mute with cowardice because they're terrified about getting a negative rating from the NRA.
Some of what you just said already exists. We have background checks. In fact, my understanding, we don't have all the data yet, but they just announced that the Dayton, Ohio shooter had bought his guns legally they do a background check. They talk about these loopholes and all of those kinds of things. There's really not loopholes.
Well, they weren't very good
reality.
background checks because the guys that he was at high school with, reported to the teacher, who then reported on to the authorities, as I understand it, that he at high school, had compiled a list of people that he wanted to kill. So something's gone very badly wrong with your background checks when you've got a disturbed kid like that who's known to the school authorities as a potentially violent child, and he still sails through a background check.
Yeah, I mean, they're looking for criminality. And that's what the background checks look for, is what kind of crimes have been committed. And if someone hasn't committed any crimes, they don't look to there's no way to really check, what teachers were reported to, maybe 4 or 5 years earlier. So obviously that's a difficult thing. I don't know exactly how you would be able to change the law to be able to reflect that. But, unfortunately, if you look at there's still errors when you come to background checks. People make mistakes on those. There was a shooting in Texas, a year and a half, 2 years ago at a church. It was horrific. That person should not have been able to buy a gun, but there was an error made in the government system that did not show that he was dishonorably discharged from the military, and he would not have been able to purchase a gun. So even background checks are not foolproof.
Your president is playing a pretty dishonourable role in all of this, isn't he? Because he's jacking up well, let me finish my question. He's jacking up the rhetoric on hate. He's attacking BME Congresswoman. He's allowing chants. He's permitting and enabling chants of send her home at these ghastly rallies that he holds. I mean, he is an overt racist and white supremacist, and that is bound to increase tensions in a country which is so divided on the issue of race.
Well, I disagree with everything you just said. He's not a racist, and I just don't agree with that. Look, there were shootings. The guy that shot up the congressman at the baseball game here, he was a Bernie Sanders supporter. It wouldn't be right to blame Bernie Sanders' rhetoric towards Republican congressmen as a reason that guy did what he did. He was obviously delusional.
Well, obviously, because Bernie Sanders doesn't come out with racist rhetoric, so it would be bizarre to blame him.
Well, he obviously racist rhetoric to some degree is an opinion, but Bernie Sanders certainly has rhetoric that was anti-Republican and anti-congressional Republican leaders, and this guy went out and decided to shoot Republican leaders. So, and I'm not saying
Bernie Sanders has never advocated violence. You've got a president who, at his rallies, has talked about how he'd like to beat up people.
Look, you can say this all you want, but when President Obama was there, we had police shootings. There were ratcheting up of police shootings, and President Obama was viewed as negative towards police. But again, that doesn't mean that's his fault that there were police shootings. In fact, during his 8 years, there were over 70 mass shootings during that time. And so you can't, again, no one's blaming President Obama for it. And to say that President Trump, because he wants illegal immigration to be halted and to have a
come on, it's not just
system.
about wanting to hate immigration. We've all heard his speeches and the language he uses and the rhetoric that he uses. It's not a measured discussion that he's having about immigration controls.
Well, wait a minute, and you're conveniently leaving out the Ohio shooter that happened also at this time, who was a far left person, probably an Antifa type person, was an Elizabeth Warren supporter, and he went in and was shooting people. So is that Elizabeth Warren's fault? Is that the far left's fault?
No, because Elizabeth Warren has never come out with racist rhetoric. I'm afraid I think this is a counsel of despair from you, Hal, but I do appreciate your time, and thank you very much indeed for taking part. That's Hal Lambert, who's the founder of the Make America Great Again Exchange Traded Fund. Well, let us know if you've any views on that. What role do you think President Trump is playing in? Why doesn't America get its act together on the gun issue? Hal's view is that Americans should be allowed to continue to buy guns as they do at the moment.